You weren't supposed to hear this, but the HOA was never about neighborhood order. It was always about control. That's what the old man whispered to me. A former military analyst who had seen villages torn apart overseas by psychological operations. He told me he moved to suburbia for peace, only to realize the same tactics were playing out behind white fences and manicured lawns. Neighborhood associations, he said, were the perfect laboratory for silent domination. They don't use guns, he said. They use bylaws. Weaponized. At the time, I thought he was paranoid. Now, I know better. This story didn't begin with a pool. It began with the illusion of order. Perfect lawns, smiling neighbors, patriotic flags, and community standards. But behind that illusion, there's something older, something primal. Men who've spent their lives trying to be free, only to find themselves crushed by invisible rules enforced by petty tyrants with clipboards. And that's exactly what I found the day Patricia Garrison, HOA president of Riverside Meadows, told me I'd have to wait 90 days to use the neighborhood pool, without a single rule written to back her up. She smiled when she said it, not out of hospitality, but because she thought she had power over me. That I would obey without questioning. That I would wait quietly, while she ruled from her leather chair behind laminated regulations. That was her mistake. Because I don't bend to soft tyranny. I expose it. That's when I started digging. Not into the ground, but into the structure, the system itself. I learned what most men never bother to uncover. HOAs were built off Cold War domestic policy, born from the same era that gave us loyalty oaths and red baiting. They were designed to create microcosms of control, uniformity, obedience. HOA boards are often staffed not by volunteers, but by frustrated power addicts. PO, people who failed to dominate the world, so they dominate a cul-de-sac. But here's the secret they don't want you to know. Their power only works if you accept the illusion. And I don't. I found the crack in their jurisdiction. I found the loophole. And I didn't just beat Patricia at her own game. I detonated the board she sat on like it was built on sand. You think this is about a pool? No. This is about how men have been quietly caged for decades. And I'm here to show you where the bars really are. You've lived your whole life obeying invisible rules, written by people you've never met. But once you see who benefits from the obedience, you stop playing their game. 3 weeks before the showdown, I stood at the edge of the community pool gate, sweating in the July heat, holding a denial letter signed by Patricia herself. No reason, no appeal, just another brick in the wall. That's when it hit me. This wasn't incompetence. This was ritual humiliation. It's how bureaucrats establish dominance. They don't need facts. They need you to comply. But I wasn't raised to kneel. I started tracking every interaction. Her tone, her evasions, the invented rules she cited from binders that never left her desk. I studied her like a hostile algorithm. And as I pushed back with logic, documentation, and city records, something strange happened. The more truth I uncovered, the more aggressive she became. Citation after citation appeared on my doorstep. My garbage cans were out too long, my car tires touched the curb, a flower pot was half an inch too tall. Half an inch. And that's when I realized I wasn't the target. My independence was. The idea that I might exist outside her authority, that I might expose her illusion. See, people like Patricia aren't born villains. They're made, slowly, by systems that reward domination and punish transparency. She wasn't just defending the pool, she was defending her empire of fear, and I was now a threat. I met others who'd been through it too. Young families, veterans, retirees, all of them quietly bullied out of using amenities they paid for. Why? Because Patricia didn't like their tone, or their background, or their unwillingness to grovel. These weren't random rules. They were strategic psychological levers, a test. Who will conform, and who will resist? That's when I found it. A legal blind spot. A strip of land next to the HOA pool. Owned not by the board, but by the city. Public use. Completely outside Patricia's reach. It was like finding a forgotten tunnel out of a prison. And I didn't just walk through it. I built something on the other side. Something bold, something visible. And as I did, I wasn't just planning a workaround. I was staging a rebellion. Not with fists, but with facts, with permits, with truth. If you've ever felt the weight of invisible chains, comment, "I see the gate below," twice. Because this is the moment you stop being a resident and start becoming a sovereign. They don't expect resistance. They expect obedience wrapped in politeness. But once you fight back with precision, their empire crumbles in silence. The plan was simple. But simplicity is the enemy of tyranny. Because tyrants thrive on confusion. They hide behind procedure, behind forms, behind phrases like standard policy. So I went the opposite way. Clear, bold, surgical. It began with a phone call to City Hall. Zoning Division. I requested public access records. That plot next to the HOA pool? Technically municipal land, zoned for recreational use, as long as it didn't obstruct traffic or utilities. Translation: free ground for anyone with the right permits. By Monday morning, I had those permits in hand. By Wednesday, I'd contracted a local business to deliver a professional-grade above-ground pool, 25 feet wide, 4 feet deep, with all safety measures intact. I paid extra for quality. Not because I needed luxury, but because I needed legitimacy. Every element had to be perfect. This wasn't just water. This was a line in the sand. The next Saturday, the sun rose like a spotlight over the battlefield. And one by one, the pieces came into place. Lounge chairs, shade tents, speakers at legal volume, coolers full of water and soda. A banner fluttered in the breeze. Thompson's Oasis, all neighbors welcome. That phrase was a knife in Patricia's carefully controlled world. Because her power relied on exclusion. Control the gate. Control the people. But I'd built a new space. Without a gate. And people came. Dozens. Families she'd turned away. Old neighbors who'd stayed silent too long. Laughter replaced suspicion. Conversations replaced citations. What she had hoarded, we recreated. Freer. Louder. Realer. And then, the click-clack of her heels. Patricia stormed down the sidewalk like a general who'd just realized the troops had defected, phone in hand, had fury in her eyes. She wasn't just upset, she was terrified. Because she knew what I had done. I had exposed the truth that her power wasn't real, that it could be bypassed with knowledge and courage. She called the police. She thought they'd shut me down, arrest me, restore her throne. But when the officers saw my permits, my compliance, my community, they didn't shut us down. They shook their heads, smiled, and walked away. Because truth, when made visible, is untouchable. She didn't lose control that day. She realized she never had it. The most dangerous thing you can do to a tyrant is show others they don't have to kneel. That afternoon, as Patricia stood frozen at the gate, watching her empire dissolve across the fence line, something shifted. Not just in her, but in the neighborhood. You could feel it, like a signal that pierced through decades of quiet submission. Her supporters, the same people who once parroted her policies and enforced her rules, were staring at the scene like they'd just woken up from a long, obedient dream. Janet, Linda, even Robert Chan, their arms weren't crossed anymore. Their eyes weren't suspicious. They were watching kids play. Families gather. Music play softly over the breeze, and for the first time in years, it looked like a community. When the police told Patricia everything was legal, she didn't argue. She stammered. Because deep down, she wasn't built for exposure. People like her are built for shadows, for whispers. They need silence to survive. They need you to believe that they are the rules. But I had broken her spell. And that's the moment every man watching needs to remember. Tyrants don't fall when you fight them. They fall when people stop fearing them. That day, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't throw a punch, I didn't vandalize a thing. I used their own laws, their own codes, their own language, turned like a blade in reverse. And here's what you're not supposed to know. HOA-style control is just the starter version of a much deeper system, a test ground. The same manipulation used in schools, corporations, governments. Silent pressures, arbitrary standards, manufactured authority. They wear different names, but they all use the same formula. Invent a rule, gatekeep access, demand submission, punish independence. But once you see that formula, really see it, you can break it. Not just in your neighborhood, but in your life. Patricia. As collapse wasn't just hers. It was symbolic. It was a glitch in the simulation. And everyone watching that day felt it. Somewhere inside you, the system hopes you'll dismiss this story. Call it petty. Call it unimportant. But the truth is, the pool was never the battlefield. You are. And if you feel it now, the crack in the illusion, the heat of the truth, then comment, "I see the gate below," again. Because awakening isn't an event. It's a decision. Rebellion doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like a lawn chair in the sun, surrounded by people who finally said, enough. After the police left, Patricia didn't retreat. She doubled down. That's the last move of every exposed authority figure, to bury the truth under more noise. She tried to summon the HOA board for an emergency session. She motioned to have rental pools banned near common areas. She even hinted at lawsuits, veiled threats laced with desperation. But it was too late. You see, once the veil of power is torn, even a little, people remember what freedom tastes like. And on that day, with the sun high and laughter echoing off the pavement, every neighbor remembered. Mark Sullivan, the treasurer, came with a cooler full of sodas. Families who hadn't spoken in months shared sandwiches. Even Janet, once Patricia's staunchest defender, sat by the water's edge, watching kids play. Her stern expression cracked into something human. That night, the board convened. Standing room only, no smiles, no snacks, just decades of quiet resentment finally given a voice. They didn't vote to punish me. They voted to investigate her. 6-1. Only Patricia dissented, and even she looked hollow doing it. The room felt like a courtroom and a revolution at once. Residents stepped forward with printed notices, emails, evidence of years of arbitrary enforcement. Stories poured out. People who had been fined, cited, and shamed for the smallest offenses. The crowd didn't shout. They didn't need to. They witnessed. And then the board's lawyer, a man Patricia had once claimed was her guy, quietly announced that her actions had exposed the HOA to legal liability. That her misuse of power had crossed a line. That's when it ended. Unanimous vote. Patricia removed. 5-year ban from any position of authority. Her face, once smug and unshakable, was pale and trembling. And as she stood pointing at me, calling me the ruin of everything, I saw something that wasn't anger anymore. It was fear. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't about her. This was bigger. This was about a system losing control. And control, once lost, never returns the same. The neighbors applauded not for me, but for what had been reclaimed. Autonomy, dignity, brotherhood, something primal and ancient, something they had forgotten existed. This wasn't about a pool anymore. This was about a man, saying no. The world you live in is built on quiet chains, but the moment you see them, truly see them, they rattle. And then, they break. The aftermath wasn't chaos. It was clarity. News of what happened spread like wildfire, not just in the neighborhood but across the city. Footage of Patricia shouting at an empty pool while laughter echoed behind her hit local news under the headline, HOA president calls police on legal pool party. But it wasn't just a funny story. It was symbolic, like watching a false idol collapse in slow motion. Her employer, a real estate firm built on the illusion of control, received hundreds of calls. A petition circulated for her removal, not just from the HOA, but from the community itself. Within 4 days, it had over 200 signatures. The people who once feared her now demanded her exile. But here's the part they won't report. The system didn't collapse because it was weak. It collapsed because someone saw through it and refused to play along. You. Men like you are the reason this story matters. Not because you hate rules, but because you hate false gods. You recognize when authority is earned and when it's stolen. And you're tired of living in a world run by people who confuse structure with supremacy. The truth is this. The same psychological warfare that governs HOAs governs boardrooms, bureaucracies, and entire governments. Manufactured authority. Gatekeeping disguised as policy. Punishment used as a leash. You're not paranoid. You're perceptive. And stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're maps out of the maze. You were taught to obey to belong, to comply to avoid discomfort. But here's what they never expected. That one day, you'd stop seeking permission. That day, I didn't just win a neighborhood dispute. I burned the script. And every man watching this has that power, to question what you're told. It is normal to walk the perimeter of your invisible fence and find the door. And if you felt something awaken during this story, not just curiosity but recognition, then let me say this: you are not alone. Comment, "I see the gate again," not just for the algorithm, but for yourself. Because once you see the gate, you don't go back in, and neither will they.